So we are going to get started now. It is 1 o'clock where we are and 10 a.m. on the West Coast. Welcome to everybody that has joined up with us. We're so excited to be here today. My name is Emily Knight. I am a manager with the Lenfest Ocean Program, and we're here to discuss a really exciting new project, understanding the ecological diversity of the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. I want to start off with acknowledging that the project is going to take place on the unceded land and waters of the Chumash Nation. And you're going to learn a lot more about that from the presentation. But I also want to acknowledge where Jason and I are here in Washington, D.C., which is the unceded land and waters of the Anacostan people, also documented as Nacostunk and the neighboring Piscataway and Pamunkey peoples. I am going to turn it over in a moment to my colleague, Jason Landrum, but first I just want to do a couple of instructions. This webinar is being recorded, so we'll be able to distribute the link to the recording far and wide after. We also are happy to take your questions. You are muted because we have so many people joining this today. To ask a question, just use the Q&A panel. If you would like to offer a comment or drop a link to a resource, we'd ask you to use the chat for that and then use the Q&A panel for questions if possible. We will check the chat. It's just easier to manage the queue that way with so many people on. So that's the reason we do that. Otherwise, I will now turn it over to my colleague, Jason Landrum, who will be our moderator today. Jason?
Thanks a lot, Emily. And hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to talk about this fantastic new project. As Emily mentioned, I'm Jason Landrum. I'm a program officer with the Lenfest Ocean Program, and I am deeply honored to moderate the session today. As a program officer, I'm charged with setting Lenfest Ocean Program's strategic vision for the wildlife and ecosystems portfolio. And part of my job is to identify and develop projects that can create useful and usable knowledge for marine resource management, conservation, and restoration. The project that we're launching today was co-developed with all the panelists here, and we're very excited for all the new relationships that have been created in the process, along with the potential impact of the proposed work in supporting the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. With that, I'm pleased to introduce the full panel today. We've got Chairwoman Violet Sage Walker, we've got PJ Webb, and we have Doctors Stephen Palumbi and Stefano Mariani. For today's webinar, we're going to hear some comments and reflections from each of our panelists, followed by a moderated Q&A session, and then a broader Q&A session so that we can hear and respond to some of your questions and comments about this new project. So today we're going to start with Violet, and she is going to provide a little bit more about the story of the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary in terms of its designation efforts and the grassroots efforts that led to its inception. We're followed by PJ, who's going to talk a little bit more about where we are in the process of the National Marine Sanctuary nomination and designation process, and we'll hear a little bit more where we are and where it's headed. And then I'll provide a few reflections from our program and as we've developed this program with all the panelists here. And then we are going to hear from Steve and Stefano a little bit more about some of the baseline monitoring and eDNA or environmental DNA work that they are collaborating with PJ, Violet, and others on for this project. With that, without further ado, I'd like to pass along to Chairwoman Violet Sage Walker. Violet, would you take the virtual microphone, and I'm happy to hear some of your thoughts.
Thanks, Jason, and thank you, Emily, for the introduction. Also, I'd just like to also acknowledge the unceded territory of the Chumash people coming from you in Guadalupe, California, with a super massive storm. So we appreciate the rain, and we're always in California grateful to get this rain blessing. And so I just wanted to acknowledge PJ and myself are in the middle of a torrential downpour. So if we have any technical issues, we will be grateful for the rain in the end, and I'm happy to be here today joining you. From the Chumash in the north, we would say hachu, which means hello, and the Chumash in the south, which is haku, which also means hello. So depending upon where you're standing in the sanctuary, you might say hello differently. One of the things that is something that I really appreciate from all of our panelists and everybody joining us here today is everybody references the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary as if it already exists. And not to correct anybody, but let's just go ahead with that line of thinking. And one of the things that people always say to me is that we are acting already like a marine sanctuary. And that's thanks to our partnerships with folks like Pew and Lenfest, with Stanford University, with OceanKind, with Packard Foundation, with all these really great supporters and scientists and researchers around the world, around the nation, around the world, that already treat us like a marine sanctuary, because hopefully we can foresee the future, but also because it's so important. And because this is such an important area, we're facing an urgency that not very many people are aware of, and that's the urgency of not just climate change, but also possibly the biggest ocean industrialization project in the United States, which is the offshore wind. And so we want to be an example. The Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary wants to be an example of how Indigenous people can lead in co-management and collaborative management, and also early baseline monitoring and data collection. We also want to be an example of how to work together with renewable energy and how to give really good information and data about what has happened here and how it can affect other people around the world. And so this is going to be the first of its kind, a tribally led nomination, early in partnership with science and research, NOAA with the federal government, with the state and local agencies, and also huge, massive renewable energy projects. So I'm really excited about all the things that we have going on. And I'd like to ask Emily if we could cue up that video. It's better to see than to hear me talk about why it's so important. So I made this short little video, 3 or 4 minute video. They'll give you a good idea of what area we're talking about. We're standing in front of part of what would be the proposed Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. It would close the gap between the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary and the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, and ban offshore oil, natural gas extraction, seismic testing, and pollution off the waters of our coasts. This is the first tribally led nominated marine sanctuary put forth by a coalition of like-minded NGOs, environmental activists, and tribal communities.
The Chumash have been the stewards and guardians since time immemorial, by Western archaeology approximately 20,000 years. The amazing thing about this movement is that we have come from a very small, under-resourced community, grassroots movement, and we had been working hand in hand with the Chumash tribe.
The Chumash people are ocean-going people. We lived by the ocean. It sustained us through food and through trade and through ceremony. One of our sacred places here for the Chumash people is what we call Liisa Miu, and that's Moral Rock. It's one of the sacred places for our people to journey, to pray for solstice ceremony, for winter and summer solstice ceremony.
This is part of the California Current, which starts up in Alaska and then comes all the way down to Baja, Mexico. That current carries the food web that we rely on. And with this big open space that does not have National Marine Sanctuary designation and protection, it's a big hole where so many things could go wrong.
If the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary is designated, it would provide increased protection for some of our most significant keystone species. The southern sea otter, which makes its home over by Morro Rock, is one of the main species that will benefit from the sanctuary. All the whales, all the marine invertebrates. You'll see the great pelicans here. You'll see the snowy egrets and the blue herons.
In this area that we're trying to get designated, we are seeing the impacts of global climate change in temperature rising, sea level rising, and the ocean acidification in particular is being found at 2 times the amount of the world's oceans. This is a project that brings together inclusion, environmental justice, indigenous communities, and underserved communities. It's powerful.
Some of our elders have spent their whole life trying to protect the coastline, trying to protect the sacred sites. We would say that our ancestors are always with us. They're in the ocean, they're in the water, they're in the air we breathe, they're in the sea, they're in the sparkles on the water.
Protecting nature begins with.
Thank you for sharing that. I'd just like to say one more quick thing before I pass it to PJ, that I am the 3rd generation to work on protecting this area, and not just from my family. This goes back to 1969 to the oil spill in the Santa Barbara Channel, and multiple generations of Chumash people, multiple generations, including the Panettas and including the folks up at Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, and people have been working on this for generations. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm hopefully going to be the one that finishes this marine sanctuary designation. And but I'm standing on the work and the shoulders of people who have done a lot of heavy lifting for us, and including my father, who had the vision as a completely underfunded, under-resourced tribal group that has been operating off of the community support and grassroots effort. He didn't let that stop him, and he had the vision that was huge and big and massive, and we're going to continue that for him and his legacy. He told me that this was the single most important thing that he'd ever done in his life. And so the time is now. There's some urgency now to get this finished so that we can move on to the things that are important, which is addressing all these issues with science and research and saving and protecting our most important resource on the planet, which is our ocean. So I would just like to acknowledge all the people who have done a lot of heavy lifting to get us to this point, and a lot of good work, including PJ, and that's my segue to PJ Webb, our advisor to the Chumash Sanctuary, and our brains behind what we're doing.
Violet, thank you so much for your reflections and kicking us off in a great way. PJ, as Violet's brought you in, if you could provide a few reflections on your own, especially as they pertain to where we are in the nomination and designation process, and a little bit more about that. So PJ?
Oh, this is the really fun part of it. Government bureaucracy at work. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about the proposed Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. We are in the designation efforts, and we know that you can help. And that's what I'm here today, is to tell you how you can help us to make our new sanctuary the best it can be. Emily, if you could put up the map, please. To familiarize you with the area that is proposed for Chumash Sanctuary designation, wanted to just make you familiar with it, showing the map. The proposed Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary would protect 156 miles. I know the video says 140, but actually it's 156 miles of coastline extending from Cambria in San Luis Obispo County to Gaviota Creek in the Santa Barbara County, bordering the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary in the north and the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary in the south. This is a feeding hotspot for marine life migrating through the West Coast. It is an area of unsurpassed natural beauty and ecological richness. It is a transition zone with incredible and vulnerable biodiversity that makes it an important ecosystem to do climate monitoring and research. We are so grateful to be a part of this innovative project with Dr. Steve Palumbi and his team and all of our partners to build a foundation of monitoring information that uses traditional ecological knowledge to inform science and research. National marine sanctuaries share a very special vision for ocean conservation, protection, and most importantly, stakeholder engagement. This presentation is not from the perspective of NOAA. I'm not a representative of NOAA, but I'm an advisor to the Northern Chumash Tribal Council. And I refer you to go directly to NOAA for substantive information about the process. It's very easy to do that by Googling sanctuary nomination NOAA, and there's all kinds of information on there for you. So I think we can drop the map now. The story of the Chumash and National Marine Sanctuary nomination goes back to before National Marine Sanctuary's nomination. It started since time immemorial. And then as of once the sanctuary started up with the passage of the National Marine Sanctuaries Act 40 years ago, there was a Central Coast National Marine Sanctuary nomination that was put in that was supported by Chumash and the grassroots community. So it starts a long time ago. I want to go very quickly over some general ideas of what the process is like. So in 2013, the National Marine Sanctuary designation process was reopened. We had already a grassroots community coalition that included Northern Chumash Tribal Council. So 2013, it was opened. There's a step that NOAA calls the community builds a nomination. Well, we took about 2 years building that coalition with our already existing strong grassroots community partners. So we, in the early 2015, we submitted a nomination. We floated it. I'm using float because Violet and I are right now in a region that's floating. We floated a nomination and it was declined. It did not float. So we just said, okay, let's do another one. And we did research, we rewrote, and we put in another one. And fortunately, that one floated. So we became a nomination in the inventory in 2015. We're in 2023 right now, just to give you some idea of the time that this can take. So you're put into an inventory, which is kind of like a closet or a bank box. You're not thrown away, but you're kind of just sitting there. So if you're in there for 5 years and you're still in the inventory and you haven't gone to designation, you have to go through a 5-year review. This is a hoop you have to jump through. If we did not pass the 5-year review, and we were the first nomination ever, we have a lot of firsts in this. We were the first nomination to have to go through a 5-year review. If we didn't pass, we would be out of the inventory. We'd have to go back. We'd have to rewrite and put in a new nomination. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200 of monopoly money. We passed and we remained in the inventory as a nomination that was still significant. We had a petition of over 16,000 supporters who weighed in. We had political support and we had diverse stakeholder engagement. So my motto is the sanctuary nomination process requires patience and persistence. So now we're in the designation process. In November of 2021, NOAA announced its intent to start the designation process. This starts the scoping public comment period. NOAA held workshops and public meetings to present information about the nomination and designation, answer questions, and hear what stakeholders had to say. Our partners and collaborators helped us get a huge amount of public support in the Federal Register, something along the lines of 30,000 individuals, along with diverse stakeholders who weighed in on what they wanted to see in the new sanctuary for protection and access to the ocean. So where are we now? It's 2023. This is the part right now where NOAA's doing the heavy lifting of preparing the draft documents. They're preparing the sanctuary proposal. The draft documents will include a draft management plan and draft environmental impact statements, which will provide and analyze a range of alternatives. For example, what proposed regulations to protect the ocean? What proposed boundaries? What part of the ocean are we going to protect? So what's coming next, and we're expecting it in May, is public review. This is where you come in. NOAA will publish their management plan and draft environmental impact plan. The public, agency partners, tribes, and other stakeholders will provide input on the draft documents. You are stakeholders. You can be very helpful given your interest and knowledge of the ocean. We want support to establish a sanctuary that is focused on science, traditional ecological knowledge, informed, adaptive, ecosystem-based management that is collaborative, truly collaborative between tribes and NOAA. Indigenous cultural values of guardianship and stewardship of the ocean, support for research, communities, and we want boundaries that provide the largest area of protection for the Central Coast waters, coastline, and wildlife. So what are we going to do? We expect this to come down in May. When the documents are published, we will post information about where to access the Federal Register, the draft documents, and where to post your comments. Lenfest will distribute this information through their newsletter as well. Your subject area expertise will be incredibly valuable to assist NOAA making the final designation documents. The environmental impacts alternatives analysis in particular requires important subject area information. Your explicit support for the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary is just as important. You can upload your comments, you can upload pertinent supporting materials such as research or papers. And I want you to know your expertise and stakeholder concerns are very relevant and very valuable in making this sanctuary the best it can be. A quote from NOAA's website: NOAA considers all input and determines appropriate changes. We are so grateful to be a part of building this. We are so thankful. So thank you.
Thank you so much, PJ, for providing some of the context of the project and the National Marine Sanctuary designation process and where we are, but also that opportunity for broader engagement by the folks that are listening here and the folks that will listen downstream of this event. So thanks so much for all of that. Before we transition to Steve and Stefano, I wanted to take the opportunity to provide a few reflections from our program and its role in supporting the development of this project. As we all appreciate, and we've already heard from this panel, knowledge and wisdom will be critical for advancing the designation and management of the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. But more importantly, it's the lasting trusted partnerships that we've heard a lot about already that are forged in the process of developing that shared knowledge and that can lead to long-term engagement and use of that knowledge. As I mentioned earlier, the Lenfest Ocean Program is dedicated to supporting projects that are positioned to inform marine policy and decision-making. And to do that, we put the information needs of folks who are making the decisions front of mind when developing potential projects. And we do our best to ensure that those projects are co-designed alongside individuals who create, communicate knowledge, and individuals who are poised to use that knowledge. During our scoping of this project, we heard from a variety of different folks that there was a need to support more Indigenous and or Native people's voices and knowledge as applied to marine biodiversity management and conservation. When we saw the announcement for the designation process for the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary, we recognized the opportunity to do just that and started to immediately work with Steve, Stefano, Violet, and PJ and others to develop a project that could address the needs associated with this protected area or the sanctuary. To this end, the Lenfest Ocean Program is just deeply honored to support this new project and the partners among the panelists that we have today in their respective communities. But wait, there's more. We not only were inspired and excited about this project, but we were inspired to act to create new partnerships ourselves. So we reached out and formed a co-funding partnership with both the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation as well as Oceankind Labs. So we were inspired by this group and how they worked together to develop this project. And we took that and we went to the philanthropic community and we created new partnerships to help support all of this work. So now with those words and all of that, well, let's move on to hear a little bit more from Steve and Stefano to provide a little bit more details on the research plan and the collaborative research efforts that they have been working and coordinating and developing with Violet, PJ, and others. So Steve and Stefano, I'll pass it on to you.
Thanks very, very, very much. And I just wanted to echo the thanks and the feeling of being very honored by being involved in all this. Like as you said, Jason, Lenfest has been an incredible partner and also bringing things together. But really, you know, at the fundamental is Violet, PJ, and this amazing group of people that we have gotten to know and that we're continuing to get to know as we move through this process. Emily, if you could kick out those slides. You know, what we've heard in this last couple of minutes was, you know, words like bold and ambitious, heritage, diversity, partnerships, and when we saw the designation process really starting up again with the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary, I looked at that announcement and thought, oh, this is what we need to really be part of. If you can just go to the next slide there, Emily, I don't have control over those. And you know what we work on scientifically is this huge diversity of organisms in the ocean. And we're using environmental DNA right now to get a look at them and using it as a way to advance, modernize, scale up monitoring of coastal oceans, not just in one place, but potentially everywhere. And what better place than here? If we just go to the next one, we can sort of look through that. We've seen the area. PJ showed it to us, and it's a very large area for any kind of monitoring. And so we really needed to look at how we could make this not only possible from a scientific point of view, but also bring it into a way that we could work with the local communities, with the Chumash tribe, and make it a community-led collaborative effort. Next, please. I know what we do with this, just to give a little brief introduction to environmental DNA, is that we gather samples, and sometimes they're cobbles from the base of the kelp forest, like shown here. Sometimes they're water samples, and in those cobbles and in those water samples, there's the DNA of the organisms that live there. Here's some of the video of Marilla looking at some of the cobbles that we collect. From those DNA samples, we extracted that. We amplify a very, very conserved piece of the DNA that most organisms have. We sequence it and we identify the critters that were there, and that gives us a list of the things that are inhabiting a particular area at a particular time. Next slide, if you wouldn't mind. And we see a huge number of things. This is where the diversity comes in, the unexpected, wondrous number of species that are there. These are just some of the little things, some of the algae, some of the copepods, amphipods, some of the little worms. Next slide. And there's some big things. These are a bunch of the echinoderms that we see in those samples, mostly from the cobbles. And then Stefano will talk a little bit about some of the fish and other organisms that we see in the water samples. And what this gives us a chance to do is take a scientific, quantitative approach to the monitoring of the coast. use these new technologies that are really ready for this kind of ambitious, bold type of geography, and then bring those kinds of information, that kind of process, to the Chumash leadership and the folks that are living along that coast, and begin to meld these approaches and this information together. Next slide, please. And that's what we are really trying to do. And we've started looking initially at this part of the coast. And honestly, you know, I was just so stunned by its beauty, its diversity, its power, and the heritage that the kind of conversations that we're having with Violet and the Tribal Council and PJ tells us that there's this incredible link, not only to the diversity of organisms there, but to the history of it and to the people that have lived here this whole time. And that is just such an incredible place to be as a scientist, also being able to bring this science to this coast and the people that have lived there all along. So I'm going to pass this along to Stefano now to talk a little bit about where we are in this, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit about connections with the community.
Yeah, thank you very much, Steve. I hope everybody can hear me, and I'll just basically follow with a bit of a teaser or taster, I could say, because in the past few months, as the project was being built, as you've heard in a various way with all the different actors, we also were too excited to actually started seeing what all this beauty actually was like by actually samplings in those locations, in some of these locations, and actually carrying out some of these analyses. If we just move to the next slide, which is the only one really where I was going to stay, it's very colorful. Unfortunately, there is that little gray bar, and the main problem with the gray bar is that unfortunately it obfuscates and covers the face on the bottom left, which is actually not one of the animals that we found, but is the young researcher, Julia, who actually was responsible to go into the lab this winter and actually generating this preliminary data. The data come from Point Buchon, which is only probably just 10–15% of the areas that we are going to cover in the coming months and years. And you will see a few little characters also on land. There is a California sea lion, a pelican, and these are the bonus features that when you investigate marine life, for example, with the molecular assays that looks for fish, you will also discover a lot of other things, and you will discover a lot of other vertebrates. And this is not even mentioning all the invertebrates, the tiny little critters that Steve has mentioned over this area, which is comparable to an area that some of our in our audience were mentioning. Is basically an area that spans probably maybe 10 kilometers from end to end, and we can see that we already, with a few samples, generate data from more than 40 species. We have some iconic organisms, such as the blue rockfish, as you can see, a couple of pelagic, we just highlighted the most common species that we identify, from the more pelagic ones, anchovies, but also the more hidden cryptic organisms that are hiding between the rocks and that are more difficult to identify. eDNA has this beautiful democratic quality that it applies to every living being. So you can really use the same technique, whether you are looking for viruses or whether you're looking for whales, it is the same approach. And this universality is one of the appeals. And also the fact that we don't have to harm and destroy organisms to actually know that they are there. You will also see from this data, that from this picture, that there are some ellipses from those locations, and sometimes these ellipses are very, very overlapped. Sometimes there is a little bit of a division, a separation, and a discrepancy between them. And these are data that come from samples obtained in different ways. The redder part of the data, the redder part of the ellipse represents data that are conventionally sampled using water bottles, the eDNA gold standards, and compared with what we call the metaprobe, which is this very little simple plastic bowl that you basically 3D print, very cheap, stuck some gauze inside, and then off you go. You can just clip it to a diver, and the diver, whilst sampling, surveying, observing, recording, as the diver swims in the water, the gauze will get soaked. And this is, I think, something that Steve will develop further. We will say another couple of things later on about this. It's one of the tools that we are using to make eDNA sampling more accessible. And it will be very important for us to show how this can be transferable in so many other contexts without requiring a lot of fiddly and often cumbersome procedures. You will see that the data sets are not identical. So actually, at the moment, we notice that by sampling water in the traditional way, sometimes you miss some of the little tiny cryptic benthic critters that the metaprobe attached to the diver instead will identify. And that is already some preliminary evidence that we can use to really unpack the diversity that we expect to identify. And I should remind you that this is just a tiny little taster of what's yet to come. And I think Steve wants to add something about modifications of the metaprobe and examples of how this can become further and explore further horizons.
Yeah, thank you, Stefano. Emily, if we could just go to the next slide and the next one. Well, I wanted to take this transition to mention the incredible amount of just amazing science that can be done along this coastline. This is an area that has been explored for thousands of years, and we know that there are very strong biological, ecological patterns along it that we really want to understand. There's a strong north-south gradient in species diversity along this part, one of the strongest biogeographic breaks in the world. It sort of shifts from northern species to southern species along this coastline, and it's the position of that break may well be an early warning signal to some of the ecosystem changes that happen because of climate change. So monitoring that breakpoint, those breakpoints across species, has been something that's been very, very, very important. And understanding those breaks across taxonomic bounds is an important scientific question. There are 3 fully protected marine reserves along the area, and that allows us to understand their role not only in diversity, but also how that diversity changes over time as the climate changes and as weather changes. We also know these ecosystems are at risk from climate change, and looking to see how those change as, say, we get El Nino events or La Nina events is part of what the monitoring can do. Violet has mentioned and shown us the migrant whales, sharks, dolphins. This is a corridor of life that goes up and down the coast that our block is called the Blue Serengeti, where we can look to see how the migration of these species is proceeding, and particularly with regard to the point that Violet brought up about the wind farms there. There are empires of seabirds that are everywhere using the diversity of life there. And of course, this long, deep history of human use and homes of this part of the coast. All of these are scientific questions that really form the basis of what could be just an amazing science program. But it's more than that as well because of the partnership with the Chumash. Next slide, please. When we were thinking about how to actually blend our approaches and understand each other a little, more and more. One of the things that we quickly came up with is just place names, because we're working from maps that have names on them like Point Bouchon, and yet we know that these places have had names. And so one of the goals we have over the course of this project is to incorporate the real place names of these places, the historic Chumash names. This is a map of just some of those, and we're going to work very hard at learning how to pronounce them correctly, spell them correctly, and then look at the diversity of how people actually refer to their old ancient homes. Next slide. We're also looking at streamlining the science. We're basically chartering boats now to do some of the sampling, but one of the things that Violet mentioned the other day was very exciting, was like, we have tumults. These are the newly constructed ancient watercraft of the Chumash, and this is a picture of one of the ones that was going out into the Channel Channel Islands just a few years ago. And then the idea of using these as sampling platforms is actually something that's really exciting and can make the work that we're going to do less expensive, more able to be done in many, many places, and bring us closer to the whole community in terms of their involvement in the process. Next slide, please. Because I think this one is the meta probes. This is Marilla Lippert, our director of field operations, launching a meta probe. You can see it at the end of the fishing rod, out into the coastline. What we're looking at is trying to develop ways of being able to sample the coast for this kind of eDNA process in as many different ways as possible, and that allow community members from all up and down the coast to be part of it when they want to. This is the fishing rod actualized metaprobe eDNA sampler, or the Frammer, and we're getting eDNA out of them right now. We're going to have to work on it a little bit to get them as detailed as what Stefano was saying. But we're getting lots of encouraging signs from the community that these are sorts of things that we can try to do to bring this project, as the science of it, into the community. Okay, the next slide, please. The arts is an incredible part of what the Chumash have always done, and this logo that has just recently been designed by one of the elders of the Tribal Council, and is just something that just warms my heart. The eDNA sort of around it, and then an image from sort of an ancient part of the Chumash tradition that speaks to me. And all of us as a way of thinking about this particular project. So expanding the role of art and science together in bringing knowledge and to bear is one of the things we're hoping to do. Next, please. We're also trying to involve the students in this area through training and teacher workshops, and that speaks to some of the things that Violet was saying about wanting the actual sanctuary itself to be co-managed by the local people that are there. And so training in how to do that, not only science management and sanctuary management, but eDNA processing, the bioinformatics of that's all open and might provide a way of linking some extra training programs that don't exist right now into this particular project, but also encourage students to go off into the world of bioinformatics and biotechnology and learn and then contribute in that particular way. Next, please. So finally, we're back at the Guadalupe Dunes, and just the incredible beauty of this particular area, and the diversity of it, the history of it, being able to be part of it, being able to contribute what we can to it, and also hearing and seeing and understanding and getting to know Violet and her team. With Lenfest support and its partners, has been an incredible thing already, and we're just getting started. So I'm just going to end there now, and again say, thank you for your ambition, Violet. Thank you for your father's ambition, and thank you for letting us be part of that, because it's really an amazing opportunity. We're very, very honored to be part. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Steve and Stefano, for providing a bit of an overview on some of the work that's already been done and some of the work that is yet to be completed, but is really exciting, and as has been a theme of this session already in this project, very collaborative in nature. So thanks to all the panelists providing their thoughts and reflections on various aspects of how this project came to be and how it fits in the current situation with the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. And so thanks to everybody, in a small virtual applause. I know everybody is in their respective houses, but small virtual applause for everybody on the panel for providing those thoughts. We'd like to now move into the moderated question and answer part of this session. And then that'll be followed by a broader question and answer session with all of you out there in the virtual space who have tuned in to this launch webinar. So as we go into this moderated session, while you're out there and thinking about all that you've taken in from all the panelists already, and as we talk about some of these moderated questions, please think about any questions you'd like to ask the panelists and put it in the Q&A section of the Zoom platform so that we can get to all those questions after this next segment. So I'd like to maybe pick on Violet a little bit and ask you to answer the first moderated question, and we'll go through all the panelists so that we can get everyone's reflections. But I was wondering if you could speak to what you think some of the most critical information needs are for establishing and managing the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. Violet, if you could offer some reflections on that, that would be great.
Sure, that's a great question, and I think about that all the time. So it's one of the things, you know, I'm thinking about that question every day when I'm driving and every day when I'm in my house, and I'm just thinking about it all the time, is how do we assess the needs of this area, especially in relationship to climate change and especially in relationship to offshore wind? And then how do we get the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary designated before the offshore industrialization happens, and also get that baseline data? And I think that we're in a good position doing this with this group to provide some of that information to inform what the offshore wind will look like, and also to inform the rest of the world what's happening here and the effects of climate change in this transition zone. Steve had talked a little bit about the transition zone, which is Point Conception area, where the north and the south species intermingle. It's also a very sacred site to us, and that whole cultural landscape there is sacred to the Chumash people. And so it's of our topmost importance to see if there is invasive species being brought in here because of offshore industrialization, if there's lack of biodiversity because of some of these projects. And frankly, we also have to acknowledge that the decommissioning of Diablo Canyon Power Plant will eventually be happening, and the outfall eventually will come out. That there's going to be a change there. There's going to be a change with underwater cabling. There's going to be all these changes happening in this area, and all eyes are on this area. And so it's critically important for us to have the sanctuary in place before all these changes happen, so that we can get this information from eDNA. And I think we're already doing it. I want to say that we're ahead of the game. We just need everyone else to catch up, and that, you know, is including the designation happening as soon as possible. So we're doing everything that we can do to get that critical information that we need now. And I just wanted to go back to one thing that Steve had mentioned about sampling from traditional watercraft. That was one of the ideas that I'd had, how to increase the amount of research done and decrease the cost, because we all know ocean research is grossly underfunded, and it doesn't even compare to the amount of money that goes into conservation on land. And so marine conservation being grossly underfunded, how could we fix that? And that's the one thing that I think we bring to the table with Indigenous people, is the ability to navigate these types of situations, because we've been operating without funding for so long that we can get things done in a way that doesn't cost as much, is still as effective, and is not having a carbon footprint on the sanctuary. So traditional vessels like the Tomol and like canoes and sailboats like the Hukalea and things like this aren't putting in the pressure of the burdens of financing, and also are very zero emission vehicle, very in line with conservation and ecology. So I think that that's a really great start to the eDNA, is using this traditional ecological knowledge and traditional vessels to bring down the carbon footprint of research in the sanctuaries.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Violet. Great points. PJ, do you want to tackle this question and tell us a little bit more about what your perspectives are on the most critical information needs for the sanctuary?
Actually, I think Violet did an amazingly comprehensive overview of what we've been talking about for a long time. So I'm going to save the time for someone else.
Okay, great. Either Steve and Stefano. Let's start maybe with Stefano, if you'd like to provide some thoughts on this question, and then we'll move over to Steve.
You're muted, Stefano.
Stefano,
Sorry, I
muted.
was muted. Yeah, I think I would probably, I'm just seeing all these questions raining in the Q&A, and I just wanted to say that perhaps we can move to the next one, and then if there is more time, I can add comments. I just want to make sure that every voice is more or less tackled within the time frame.
Sure thing, Stefano. Steve, did you have any comments on this question before we move on?
No, I take Stefano's point, but I just amplify Violet's. There's ways of getting answers with the environmental DNA that we can really add to, like invasive species. When they're coming, are they being accelerated by climate change? But we're really looking forward to taking that and also pairing it with what's already known and what the traditional uses of the area are telling us as well.
Awesome, thanks. So the second question I'd like to pose to all the panelists, and I hope everyone can answer this because there's probably going to be different answers. And I'll pick on PJ this time as the first responder because she got really excited about this. And along the theme of excitement, the question is, what are you most excited about in terms of the development of this new proposed National Marine Sanctuary?
Well, for me, it's the idea of seeing damaging policies and practices ending. And the people I get to work with are amazing. Working with inspirational tribal leaders like Fred, Violet, Bear Clan Elder Michael Cusarate, Chairwoman Mia Lopez, Jeanette Acosta, the inspiration of our elders, Palula Cus, Roberta Cordero, who's always been a very inspirational leader in this area. And so many others who are following in the footsteps of their elders, and they remind us of this all the time. It's been handed down generation to generation, and the importance of making this area safe for the next generations, because global climate change is really going to hit the next generations. And working with young people like Gianna Patchen, energy. Lots of focus. They give me an energy boost knowing they'll continue this work. So that's makes me excited.
Excellent. Thanks so much, PJ. Violet, what makes you most excited about this?
I would have to say probably the most exciting thing that we've done so far is, and this is a little outside of what we've talked about, so is that the international partnerships that we've been developing. I'd like to just say that Steve kind of said this word to me. He said Palau, and I'm like, where's Palau? And then I had to get a map, and then I went there for the last ocean conference that we had there, and being able to connect with Indigenous people around the world who are fighting with the same crises that we're having here. Being able to see and hear stories of people like from the Papahanauana Mauna Kea, the stories of the Hukalea, the stories of canoe journeys, the stories of our relatives up in the Olympic Peninsula and in Alaska, talking to people on the Great Barrier Reef, all those connections. I kind of have coined this phrase sister sanctuary. And I think that we really need to think about how we're obligated to the rest of the world to provide safe passage for the animals that will continue on to these other sanctuaries, and also to share stories of our Indigenous allies and relatives around the world who are facing disastrous climate change and who are actually the first responders. So I'm really proud of the work Indigenous people are doing around the world in climate action and leadership. And so that's probably not exactly the most exactly directed at the Chumash Sanctuary, but that's the thing I'm most excited about, is how we've connected this spot with the whole rest of the world.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Violet. Steve, do you want to tackle this one? What are you most excited about?
Well, those things absolutely. But one of the other aspects of it, in addition to this, the science that we can do is that we have an opportunity to kind of, I think about reversing the flow of say, knowledge and experience. We're going to build with the eDNA here and with the Chumash Tribal Council a way of doing this monitoring in the context of this sanctuary. And you're right, Violet, I do think of it as already existing. And we'll get that worked out and work out the procedures and all that. And then we can contribute that to the other sanctuaries, Monterey Bay to the north and Channel Islands to the south and all the way up and down the coast. So instead of everyone sort of training the new guys about how to do their stuff, we can actually reverse that flow and take this tribal and traditional knowledge in eDNA and use that to hope benefit others.
Thanks so much, Steve. And Stefano, what do you think? What are you most excited about?
Well, I'll probably pick a couple of aspects, and maybe they are probably emblematic of the fact that I'm a bit of an outsider. You're coming from all the way another ocean. I have to fly over a different ocean and another continent in order to get to those coasts. And I would be lying if my nerdy, childish, me wouldn't just be super curious. When you're a biologist and an ecologist, you have an opportunity to really discover and learn about the biodiversity of a new place where you haven't worked a lot. I mean, that is inevitably, that's something that immediately piqued my interest at the beginning. But my more grown-up answer is the answer about having the opportunity to learn. This is because it's such a unique way of doing research, science in the broadest sense, co-creating a project from the onset with a variety of stakeholders that have, multi-generational, multi-millennial investment in an area and its ecosystem services, and having the opportunity to contribute to that. It's absolutely marvelous for a person that is, we could say, like at a latter stage of my career. Sometimes you feel like, where am I going to learn the new things? Where am I going to be pushed into outside my comfort zone? And you want these projects where that force you to become a student again. And that is one thing that really, really, truly excites me.
That's great, Stefano. Thank you. And thank you to all the panelists for answering these two moderated questions. It's always inspirational to hear your thoughts and to hear where you think the biggest impact is and how this has been developing. So thank you so much for providing those reflections. We'd now like to move into the broader question and answer section of the webinar. And so we're going to go down the list of some of the questions that folks have already put in the Q&A section. And again, if other questions arise during this part of the session, please do put in your questions and answer your questions, and we'll try to get to all of all of the questions that we've got here today with the remaining time. I also wanted to caveat some of these questions. Some of the questions here may be more political in nature and maybe beyond the scope of this project, but I'll read them all aloud anyway, and I'll offer the panelists to offer any reflections or any thoughts if they feel like they can answer the questions. If not, maybe we can find others who can provide some information on these questions downstream if you're interested. So the first question we've got is by George Leonard, and George says, super inspiring, and with a minor question, why doesn't the southern border wrap around the CI Channel Island Sanctuary like it does with Monterey to the north? Any of the panelists have any idea about that or could offer some thoughts?
I can go ahead and address something about that.
Okay.
That is the Santa Barbara Channel, which, as you know, if you've ever driven by there, is filled with offshore oil drilling rigs who are undergoing a transition, most of them from their leases ending, and they're going to be dismantled, et cetera, et cetera. So between that and it's one of the busiest shipping channels, it was just very difficult to figure out if that was likely to be able to have sanctuary protection, given the transition of all of those offshore oil drilling rigs, some of whom are leaking now. So the easiest way to do it was to include the outer continental shelf as a cohesive unit. Now, when we're looking at that, that is the proposed boundary. That is, we will not know what the final boundary looks like, but there's definitely going to be an ability to comment on where people think the boundaries should be on the next public comment.
Awesome. Thanks, PJ. Anyone else want to weigh in? I think that was a pretty good response. Okay, next question is from Tom Hafer. And this goes back to some of the thoughts that Violet talked about earlier about the wind farm. And it's the question, and it's a bit long. So what is the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary going to do when the 376 square mile wind farm kills whales, birds, impacts upwelling, impacts migration of salmon, crab, and other migratory species? Is the sanctuary going to allow the cables to go in? This requires sonic testing, dredging, burying cable that will impact the bottom of the fisheries. So what's the policy to deal with this type of industrialization?
Thanks, Jason. I'll answer that one. And it's something that we lose sleep at night over. So I just want to say that the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary team, it does not directly affect the decisions that BOEM is going to be making with offshore wind. At this point, we would like to ask people not only to comment on the offshore wind management plan, including community benefits and mitigation measures. It's critically important that people on this call weigh in on what's going to be planned out for the offshore wind. So I'd like to just offer the option of going to our website, chumashsanctuary.com, chumashsanctuary.org, sign up for our newsletter. We will be providing information on how to make federal public comments on both the sanctuary nomination and the offshore wind when that is ready. So we would appreciate as much support for all those concerns with the whales, the fishing, the pollution, the industrialization of the coastline, the change in shipping lanes. We're as concerned about that as everybody else is, including the fishermen. And so it's not something that can be solved in a short term. This is a long-term plan. And so once again, everyone's support on the sanctuary designation is critical. And please sign up on our website to get the information needed to make public comment.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Violet. The next question is from an anonymous attendee. And the question is, can eDNA provide the quantity of specific species in the area? Would anybody like to offer to answer this one?
Yeah, I can jump in. Oh,
Steve and Stefano look like they're chomping at the bit. So either of you.
No, I just say something brief that because this was quite a popular comment, there were quite a few other attendees that mentioned, how much can we use the quantification of, as well as just the simply saying that the species is there. Yes, there are many caveats, especially because the species that we are dealing different in size hugely. They differ in metabolism hugely. And some of them are unicellular and some of them are vast because they are huge, elasmobranchs or mammals. So you cannot compare like for like, but certainly there are many, many ways currently that the scientific community is developing in order to make use also of this amount of DNA, because we will generate amounts of the DNA reads that obviously have a meaning. You have to be able to tease out the noise from the signal, but there is a lot of signal there. So there are ways of comparing like for like. For example, you can compare only certain organism with other comparable organisms. You can compare the same organism over space and time. And you can use also the knowledge about the affinity of the primers that you're using with the original template DNA that you expect to amplify to estimate the probability of having that signal, being efficient more or less than other species. And on top of that, you can compare the abundance of DNA reads that you get from samples with the frequency of occurrence with which you actually bump into a species across many samples. And generally, we observe that the very common species that you hit in your samples end up being also the ones for which you have more reads, which suggests probably an abundance in the environment. I'll stop here, and probably Steve had additional comments on that.
Just only Stefano and everyone that's exactly right. We've got other comments about whether this is a presence absence type data set or not, and Stefano's given some of the nuances about that. At the basic level, if the presence absence data is really useful if you have lots of samples, and so that gets into the how many samples can you get, and how inexpensive and affordable can you make it, and how can you use the community involvement to add to that sample and analysis base. And the more we can do that, the better our presence absence map of these species will be.
That's awesome. Thank you, Stefano and Steve. Thank you. Katie Matthews had a similar question, and hopefully that addressed your questions as well, Katie. And Madison had a different spin on this, and she was asking, well, she first said, very excited about the development. Thank you for all the work you're doing to implement truly inclusive ecosystem-based management. I was curious if you had quantified the functional biodiversity of the proposed area to better understand the stability and nuance of these ecosystems. And I think that's an opportunity maybe to talk about, Madison's question about functional biodiversity, but maybe even different definitions of biodiversity or different aspects of measuring, especially with the partners from Violet and PJ from the Northern Chumash. So who would like to tackle that one first? Do we want to start with the functional biodiversity, maybe Steve and Stefano, and then we can transition and get some reflections from Violet and PJ?
Yeah,
I'm happy.
Stefano's excited.
No, I don't want to be too over. I don't know how to say over present, but this is a really great point, and we have already worked on several data sets from other parts of the world that shows actually that eDNA is, compared to other more traditional survey methods that are based on the capturing or visual observation of these organisms, that is less biased to the same functional groups. And in that, I mean, is that is not only able to capture a broader diversity of species, but also a broader diversity of functional traits. And that is a huge advantage for being able to really capture how an ecosystem works. And that is one more advantage that initially we didn't know that eDNA had, and now we know that this had. And so this also gives us a bit of a foot in the door to doing ecological modeling really in a traditional, Western academic way, but also a foot in the door and a gateway to really initiate conversations about traditional knowledge and what the role of certain species have always been perceived to be in the Chumash tradition, and how that matches with what we understand from their really the ecological role from Western science. And I think that's a huge opportunity.
Great, Stefano. Thanks.
Just one little example sort of on that line. What's going on up and down the west coast of the US right now is a lot of interest in kelp abundance and sea urchin barrens that have overwhelmed kelp forests all up and down the coast, some associated with the decline of sea stars because of the sea star wasting disease. When we look at our cobble data, we see, and we can tell how much kelp is in a particular area and how many sea urchins. We can ask how many other species are associated with those two, and there's hundreds of other species that are actually more abundant when there's a healthy kelp forest. There's also dozens, scores of species that are more abundant when there's a lot of sea urchins. And so we can use the incredible number of different taxa to get an idea of how these ecosystems are actually functioning this way.
Great, thank you. Violet, it looks like you're ready to provide some thoughts. We'd love to hear from you.
Sure. I was just going to say that's we had written a story about this partnership too, and we called it Two-Eyed Seen, which is actually Steve had called it Two Eyes Seen into the Kelp Forest, and I just thought he made a typo, but it's Two Eyes Seen, which is the lens of the Western science versus like a lens the other eye sees in like tradition and culture and heritage. And I just wanted to know, you know, one of our Chumash elders, Flo Gutierrez, did the artwork for us, and our staff member Gianna says it's a guy with an urchin, and this is, you know, this is the guy with the urchin that we did the logo with. And I was like, is that a guy with an urchin? and so now it's a guy with an urchin. And you know, it's this kind of blending of, you know, knowing and science and knowing what's there, but also putting the context and the story and like making it like the human connection. And so everything that we find and what's there, what's in the kelp forest, what's causing the kelp forest to either be healthy or not so healthy, too many urchins, not enough urchins, all the stuff that we're talking about is going to be put into context, and how that relates to the human, you know, condition and to our people and to our culture. So I think that that's an interesting question. That was all I had to contribute, was it's two different ways of looking at the same thing.
Totally. Thank you so much, Violet. PJ, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, from a layperson's point of view, you know, as we're looking forward to the designation of the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary, this helps us know what is the status of the ecosystem here before the sanctuary, and what is the status going to be when the sanctuary begins. You know, how is it going to impact the protection of the diversity, the biodiversity? And as they've talked about, do we have invasive species? You know, and to be able to have that data so you can hopefully parse out global climate change impacts, pollution impacts, et cetera. And then on top of that, having that monitoring, not only just as a baseline, but to continue, we'll be able to hopefully see, the scientists will be able to hopefully see the impacts of the development of offshore wind farms. So by seeing those differences within the sanctuary, and then there's not a wall out there that stops impacts from that kind of industrialization from entering the sanctuary. Then hopefully with ecosystem-based management, they'll be able to address and mitigate the impacts as they see the numbers change. And I think that's really vital. And I think it's going to be a model that can be used universally. It's very exciting. It's very groundbreaking. Or ocean breaking, ocean healing.
Ocean healing. I like that. Along this similar thread, an anonymous attendee asked, are there any species in the area that do not have good coverage in the reference database, and that would require further work to cover before further eDNA work is carried out? Or can you reanalyze those data for those species once you have the samples?
Well, just
Stefano's pointing to somebody.
I don't want to start this one, but I can comment on it.
The answer is yes. There's a lot of species for which we do not have, representative DNA in the database. Maybe about a third of them, actually, and not so many of the fish. A lot of the invertebrates we don't have in the database. And yes, we can try to get them in. But we know a lot about the type of organism they are anyway, from the way those DNA sequences are related to others. We know that they're little crustaceans, amphipods. We know they're little worms, for example. We would know if they were small fish that we didn't have any in the database. So we would know something about them, but we wouldn't know everything. And one of the really amazing things that we've sort of been walking towards and talking with Violet and her crew is that we don't need to know everything. We don't need to have a name for everything. We don't need to have a handle and a box to put everything in. The life is there, and it's valuable, and it's precious, and it's part of the system. And so the eDNA gives us this amazing view of just knowing that it's there. We can put some names on some of them, but they're Latin names that came from Western science. And what about the Chumash names? And what about what we would call them there? So we're really having those conversations now that we wouldn't have had before. And that's just one of the exciting things.
That's awesome. Thanks, Steve. And actually, building off of that, Megan Medina asked, And I think this is a great point to talk about how you guys have been collaborating and how what this collaboration means for other sanctuaries and broader influence, kind of what Violet was talking about with the different communities that she's been engaging with outside of this immediate project. And how might the official designation as a national marine sanctuaries impact the procedures for what types of projects and research can occur within the heritage site bounds? And a follow-up question, will the cultural and historical value to the Chumash of the generated data and information be maintained and communicated through the bureaucracy of federal government process? And I think maybe, or other means, maybe some reflections on those 2 points or those 2 questions from the group.
Well,
Somebody
I could go first.
Great.
One of the things that we've spent a lot of time thinking about is what does collaborative and co-management mean? And we are hoping, and this is for anybody taking notes in the meeting, to have an independent and separate office for the tribal co-management from NOAA, that we would be able to manage like a foundation, that we'd be able to attract research projects, private funding, and be able to move faster than the government does. And so we would like to be able to have educational opportunities that the tribe could provide in a more timely manner, and without the severe budget constraints that NOAA has and some of the marine protected areas have. So I think that one of the things people ask is what's going to happen after the nomination, and we're hoping that we can continue this organization group of supporters into a foundation that can truly co-manage, and also work with partners like Stanford and Cal Poly and other universities to have the 40 or 50-year vision of what co-management means, and also be able to act independently and collaboratively with NOAA and other groups too. So I think one of the unique positions that the tribe is in is being able to respond and act quickly, being able to act like a marine sanctuary now and not wait for the official designation, because this is so important. And so the work we're doing now is critical to the rest of the world. And so I forgot the second part of the question, but
it was related to cultural and historical value of the Chumash, of the data and information, and how it's going to be maintained and communicated.
And that was something that I was going to mention, that we would definitely like to eventually have some type of tribal centralized location to be able to store and keep our own data. But for now, we are entrusting this great group with Steve and Stefano to be caretakers of the information for us until we're prepared to do that on our own.
Great, thank you, Violet. Other reflections from the group? I think you covered it pretty well. Thank you so much, Violet. And then one last question we've got in the queue from George Leonard is, and this is a great one, the integration of Western science and traditional knowledge here is really cutting edge. At Ocean Conservancy, we're in the early stages of trying to integrate different ways of knowing and traditional knowledge into our generally Western science-based advocacy work. Do you have any advice on how we can do this respectfully and effectively? Violet?
I knew you were going to pick on me.
I saw you came off mute, so I was like, Violet's got something to say.
Yes, I knew I was going to be the one. I think that there is this Western scientific world idea of consultation, and then there's the non-Western idea of consultation. And so one of the things, as an example, is that Steve and his group have come down here, and we meet face to face, we share meals together, we talk together, we know our families, our stories, we've met generations of our relatives, we do short trips together. So I just want to say that you can't send out a consultation letter and expect that to be enough to inform a collaborative partnership. And it doesn't matter how many emails or letters you send out, you have to meet people in person where they are and on their level, and be able to provide something that they need in order to participate. And that's a lot of times the lack of participation is actually there's actually barriers to participation, and that could be something as simple as internet access or telephone or reception or transportation. And so make sure that the people that you want to connect with, you're meeting their basic needs of being able to get where they need to go, be able to afford to go, and being able to be valued. And so that's one of the things that tribal people are often left out of the conversation, or don't have a seat at the table, is because they can't actually physically get there, and they have to choose to work over participate. And so that needs to change in order to have meaningful consultation with Indigenous people around the world. They need to be able to participate on a more equal level. And so that is just showing appreciation for their time and commitment to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Violet. Any other panelists want to weigh in?
I would just like to really echo that, and what we have already learned and really appreciated is that this is a process, and it's a human process. It's a relationship process. You can't put an agenda on how you're going to combine traditional knowledge and science. It has to. You have to allow it to happen, and Violet has said all the things that can get in the way of that. But it takes time, and it takes interactions, and it takes laughing. You have to laugh. That's my advice. If you're not laughing, you're not going to get this done.
And it takes food.
Yeah.
I just have to say, the tone of respect and the give and take that we've experienced with Steve and all the members of his team have really nurtured this relationship. It started a long time ago. Dr. Palumbi has been a supporter of the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary before this project ever came up. And so that's, it's a long-term thing. And sometimes we're too busy because we don't have an awful lot of extra resources that we can't really meet him as often as he asks to. But he is also enlarging the audience of educational institution contacts down here. We're getting UCSB, and we're getting Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and the people who work there, the students, the professors. There's getting to be a network. There's been a little bit of a hole between the southern boundary of Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary and the Channel Islands, and there hasn't been quite as much scientific research, and there hasn't been quite as much exploration of that. And so this is really making great inroads towards knowing this part of the Central Coast of California, which is a very important part.
That's great. Thank you so much, PJ. And thanks for all the questions. I'm not seeing any other questions in the queue. So wanted to close this out with one final question for all the panelists, and just wanted you to think about the vision and the future of the sanctuary. And basically, what are your thoughts and vision for the future of the sanctuary, and how do we set ourselves up to support it over the long term? I'll start with Violet again.
Okay, I was going to go last this time.
Okay, well,
I'll have the last word.
We'll have the last word. Okay, well, let's start with Stefano. You want to start us off?
Yeah. I mean, my hope is that, well, first of all, the exciting part is that eDNA is a relatively young science, at least in the way it has been used for macrofauna, for conservation. And in a way, it is an advantage that it hasn't got really sturdy, unmovable constraints dictated by 100 years of traditional practice. And that is fantastic, because it's very malleable and flexible, and which means that it's really amenable to this new co-creation approach. And now all of a sudden we see that there are a lot of groups and stakeholders, we can call them, that are really receptive, and they want to blend this new way of doing things with different requirements. There is a perception that this is going to be useful. So my wish is that this project can become almost like I don't want to be too arrogant in calling it a blueprint, but certainly influential in how things are done in the future elsewhere in other US federal scenarios, but actually elsewhere in the world, where you actually have the opportunity of really blend traditional knowledge, the requirements of governments and local communities, and essentially see how eDNA really works in practice. And so in that sense, I really have this wish.
Excellent. Thanks, Stefano. PJ, you want to provide some thoughts, and then we'll go to Steve, and then we'll close out with Violet.
When the designation is completed, that's not the end. There's going to be, hopefully, permanently, years and years and years of adaptive management and co-management with the tribes, as well as the importance of the eDNA project in helping provide really informed data for truly efficient adaptive ecosystem-based management. So it's going to keep on going. The Northern Chumash Tribal Council has so many pilot projects that we're putting together that are both cultural and heritage and educational, saving languages, saving songs, saving stories. We've got a lot going on. This is not the end, and the tribe is going to be hopefully, truly, collaboratively a management partner to NOAA. And on the other side, there's so many things that we have that we're doing that we're going to keep doing with all of our tribal partners, and including the Indigenous Ocean Solidarity Alliance, where we're connecting with Indigenous-led conservation all around the globe. So there's a lot to do, and the future's great. It's very expansive, and I need some of Violet's energy.
Thank you so much, PJ. Steve?
Yeah, this is a great thing. We look at what we are trying to put together right now. It really is as a way to step into the future with the protection that the sanctuary will provide and the connections of the people that are living there now. But there's also change happening, and the next 50 years is going to be enormous change along the coast. And once the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary is put in place, then that plus the partners in Monterey and Channel Island will be marching into this future as the climate changes, as the coast swarms, as there are these renewable energy projects, as things shift all around. And what I really hope is that what we can do is help prepare all of these areas with the eDNA and with the links to the people, so that they're more able to deal with the change and make it change that people can actually, not only just survive, but thrive under. That future is all of ours. And this is just one little way that I hope that we can help get to there.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve. And Violet, some final reflections to close us out.
Thank you for hosting too. I really appreciate it, Jason and Emily and everyone that's helped us bring this together, all of our partners. I just like to say that, we didn't think about being partners with eDNA years ago. This is something that is one thing that my dad taught me, is just to embrace and accept, things that are great ideas and have vision and have, not be set in your way of thinking to where you might miss opportunities. And so I just want to say that, our vision for the future, this has become a vision that has evolved, taken us places that we never thought we'd be, and having brought partners into our lives that we never thought that we'd be partners with. And this is a really cool, eDNA is very cool. And it's almost as cool as learning how to make a public federal comment. So we will train you all to make federal comments to support the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary nomination into designation. And don't forget to go to our website, chumashsanctuary.org, sign up for our newsletter, and be a part of this journey with us, and be this is going to continue. We don't know what the future will look like, and we don't need to. Just like with eDNA sampling, we don't need to know everything. We just need to do it. And so we're gonna, we are gonna make this blueprint, like Stefano says. We are that excited about the work that we're doing as cutting edge and first of its kind. And we hope to be able to share this with our allies and friends around the world.
Thank you so much, Violet, and just wanted to thank the whole panel for spending time with us today to talk about this wonderful project. Emily, do you want to give us some parting words?
No, just thank you all for coming, and we'll get the recording out there as soon as it's ready. Thank you so much to our speakers, and thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Lenfest folks, and everyone involved. It's just amazing.
Thank you, everybody, really.
Bye-bye.
Looking forward.